Hey, I'm excited to talk to you today about what it means to yield your rights for the greater cause. Jesus gave us a great example of that at the end of chapter 17, and I want you to see it. So listen in today.
Welcome to Everyday Truth with Kurt Skelly. We believe the Bible is true and relevant to everyone, everywhere, every day. If today's conversation is a help to you, take a moment to leave a review or share it with a friend. Thanks for listening. Now, let's join Kurt for today's episode.
Welcome back, friends, to today's episode of Everyday Truth. We are in Matthew chapter 17. In fact, we have just a short little section here in Matthew 17 to finish. I think we kind of went quickly yesterday, so let's look at verse 22, where Jesus is explaining how he was able to help this man and his son, and the other 9 disciples were not. So we talked about that last episode, but it says that while they abode in Galilee, Jesus said unto them. And what this means is this is a season in Jesus' ministry where he is continually clarifying his mission as the suffering servant. We talked about how the disciples were so hardwired in their thinking about who Messiah would be, that Messiah was going to be a hero and a warrior and a king. And while all that is true, he would first be that one that would suffer like a lamb. And they were not so quick to understand that or even to believe that. So Jesus was reiterating this. And it says in verse 22 that Jesus said, "The Son of Man shall be betrayed into the hands of men." So he's specifically talking about betrayal. Interesting, because obviously among the 12 is Judas, and Judas never was a believer. Jesus called him a devil even as far back as the feeding of the 5,000. So he's predicting a betrayal. And betrayal obviously implies that some that have previously followed are now going to go on the opposite side. So we think about a Benedict Arnold, or of course we think about Judas when we think about betrayal. And Jesus is making this prediction. Look at verse number 23. "They shall kill him, and the third day he shall be raised again." So reiterating that this is part of his mission. I am going to die. I am going to rise again. So even though they're not understanding this, they're going to remember these conversations. The Bible talks about that afterward, when they look back on it, they're going to remember, he did tell us this time and time again. So strong is their preconception, though, about who Messiah was in their thinking, that they're just not hearing this. They're not hearing this definitively. And that's the power of preconception. Sometimes, if we're not careful, we only hear the things from Jesus. We only hear the things from the Word of God that we want to hear. And they wouldn't want to hear that their leader would be betrayed or be killed. They don't want to hear that. And it's amazing how the human mind can manufacture imaginatively what it wants to hear. And the disciples would much rather hear about a Messiah that they believed in, a Messiah that would rule and reign, a Messiah that would have status, a Messiah that they could rule and reign with so that they could have status. In fact, this season of Jesus' ministry, where he is really making a beeline for Jerusalem and will complete his mission, is a study in contrast, because as Jesus gets increasingly closer to his fateful day, the disciples become increasingly more proud as they talk about who's going to be the greatest in the kingdom, and Jesus is having to adjust that thinking. Look at verse number 23 again. The Bible says, "And they were exceeding sorry." So anytime Jesus would talk about these things, it would really affect them emotionally. They don't want to hear this. This is something that is affecting them emotionally. And even though this is good news, it's the gospel, the death, the burial, the resurrection, they're sorry because they're thinking through just the part of it where he's going to be betrayed and die. They're really not thinking through the power of the resurrection, the necessity of the resurrection. And that should be a wow factor. Jesus has already told the religious leaders that the sign will be the sign of the prophet Jonah. That just as Jonah was in the belly of that fish for 3 days and 3 nights, so I will die and be buried and rise again on the third day. So they're not seeing really the glory of, the exclamation point of the gospel. Verse number 24, and when they were come to Capernaum. So understand that Capernaum was Jesus' adopted headquarters for his ministry, but that ministry has really taken a step back, all the way back to the feeding of the 5,000. Jesus is no longer popular like he once was. In fact, Jesus is making his way really to Capernaum, but almost through Capernaum, because the last 9 months, especially the last 6 months of Jesus' ministry, he never goes back here. The great days are behind him. He's already actually pronounced a woe or a rebuke on Capernaum and Bethsaida and Chorazin. Why? Because these cities were cities where he had often preached and done miracles, and yet they had rejected him. And with great opportunity comes great responsibility. I just spoke at the National Christian School Convention at Bob Jones University here just a day or two ago as I'm recording this. And I saw thousands of young people, and I challenged them. Some of you young people might be listening to this podcast now for the very first time. And just to understand that the more opportunity we have to be around the Lord, to learn about the Lord, the more accountability we have before the Lord. And here were these cities that had so much information about Jesus. They saw him so often. They were witnesses to his miracles and to his messages. Well, there's a high level of accountability when you have that level of opportunity. So the Bible says Jesus is back in Capernaum, and they that received tribute money, the tax collectors, came to Peter and said, "Doth your master pay tribute?" Hey, does your master pay taxes? Now, this would be an explosive issue. Why? Because that was a very important reason why the tax collector was there. He's representing Rome, and Rome is going to get its money. Rome is all about its vassal states paying their dues. So they're asking, hey, does your master pay tribute? Now, this is not an informational question. They're not trying to satisfy their curiosity. They're trying to find ways to trip up Jesus or to put him at odds with the Roman government. Eventually, that's what they do in Jerusalem. They put him at odds with the Roman government. That's how they convinced Pilate to have him crucified. He's an insurrectionist. So here, does he pay taxes? And watch what Peter says in verse 25. Peter, he didn't always have the right answer, but he always had an answer. Have you ever met somebody like that? They're going to say something confidently. They might not be right, but they're going to be bold. And Peter says in verse 25, he said, "Yes, my master pays taxes." And when he was come into the house, Jesus prevented him or preceded him and said, so Peter just dismissed this question. Well, yes, of course he pays taxes. And Jesus comes privately and asks Peter this question. Ready for it? Verse 25. "What thinkest thou, Simon? Of whom do the kings of the earth take custom or tribute? Of their own children or of strangers?" So Caesar, does he collect taxes from his own family? Does he collect taxes from his own kids? Or do you think that's the reason why he's dominated the world and he has all these other nations where he can collect money from people he doesn't know to feed the people he does know and to build the palaces for the people he does love? And of course, the answer is obvious. He doesn't charge his own children. He's raising tax money from all these strangers, these foreigners. And Peter knows that. As it says in verse 26, Peter saith unto him, "Of strangers." Jesus saith unto him, then are the children free. And the point that Jesus is making is, especially if this tax is for the temple tax, what Jesus is saying is, should I, the Son of God, should I have to pay tax? And of course, the answer is no. There's no obligation for Jesus to pay tax. And yet Peter has said definitively he pays taxes. But watch what Jesus says in verse 27. Notwithstanding, lest we should offend them, go thou to the sea, cast an hook, take up the fish that first cometh up, and when thou hast opened his mouth, thou shalt find a piece of money. That take and give unto them for me and thee. So Jesus just made the case, I don't have to pay taxes. I am the child of the King. I am the Son of God. And yet Jesus said, but I'm not going to die on this mountain. I'm not going to base my ministry on the things I don't have to do or do have to do. As a matter of fact, I would rather pay these taxes, even though I'm not required to, so that that's not an issue. Because I didn't come to fight battles about taxes. I came to seek and to save that which is lost. And what a great principle for you and me. Sometimes we fight about, well, there's nothing wrong with that, or I don't know why I can't do that, or what a poor way to look at life. What we need to be looking at is, does this behavior in my life, is this going to accentuate the gospel and accentuate my witness? Or is this going to be a stumbling block, an offense to others? Even if it's not a right or a wrong thing, it's not about the dogged defense of my rights. It's about the mission of my life. And what Jesus was demonstrating in these verses is that he was more than willing to yield his personal rights in order to promote a greater cause. And that's exactly what God calls us to do as well. So it's just a small little story here, but with rich, rich meaning. And isn't that a cool way by which Jesus supplied the tax money? Hey, go fishing. First fish you catch, look inside its mouth. These were bottom feeder fish that would eat whatever's on the bottom of it, and you're going to find a coin. I mean, you talk about a unique miracle of God. Here it is. So what's the takeaway? Well, the takeaway is go fishing. Go look for money fishing. Of course, that's not the takeaway. The takeaway is, what is it in our life that we make a big deal about, and we might even be right about, that's doesn't amount to a hill of beans when it comes to eternity? Be willing to yield your personal rights for the purpose of being a good testimony for the greater cause of Jesus Christ. So we'll leave it at that at the end of chapter number 17. I hope that helps. I hope you can find an application or two. But that's it for us for today. We'll jump into a brand new chapter next episode. Do hope you'll join us for that. Until then, God bless you, my friends.